Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome, focused learners. So today we're basically stepping into the shoes of a working biologist to make some sense out of the absolute teeming chaos of nature. I mean, think about the millions of living things on Earth. How do we even keep track of them all without getting hopelessly lost? Well, we use the biologist's blueprint, classification. In this explainer, we're going to unpack exactly how scientists categorize life, and I'll be sharing some absolutely crucial hacks to help you memorize these rules with zero stress. Let's get started. Here is our blueprint for today. 1. Organizing the chaos of life. 2. Names and identification keys. 3. The 5 biological kingdoms. 4. Classifying the animal kingdom. 5. Plants, ferns and flowers. And finally, 6. Viruses, the ultimate exception. Part 1. Organizing the chaos of life, the hierarchical system. At its core, classification is just the process of arranging organisms into groups based on the features they share. Biologists look for a natural system, grouping things by their external morphology, their internal anatomy, and, nowadays, their DNA. This brings us to the taxonomic hierarchy, which is essentially the ultimate filing cabinet of life. Take the taxonomy of a human, for instance. We arrange organisms in a decreasing order of broadness, starting with domain and kingdom at the very top, and then working all the way down through phylum, class, order, family, genus, and finally landing on species at the absolute bottom. Each of these categories is called a taxon, and as you move down that pyramid, the organisms in the group share more and more highly specific features. Part 2. Names and identification keys, the biologist's toolkit. So, to avoid a massive amount of confusion when naming all these distinct organisms, biologists developed an internationally agreed toolkit known as the binomial system. This simply means every single organism gets a 2-part scientific name, indicating its genus and its species. And there are strict rules here. The genus always gets a capital letter, the species is all lowercase, and they're either printed in italics or underlined if you're writing them by hand. For example, humans are Homo sapiens. That second part of the binomial name represents the species. Now you might be wondering, what exactly is a species anyway? Biologically speaking, it's the smallest natural group of organisms. They share almost identical anatomy, physiology, and behavior. But the true ultimate test of a species, it's reproduction. They literally must be able to reproduce with one another in nature and produce fertile offspring. Now, what's really interesting about this is seeing the ultimate fertility test in action. So if a male and female horse reproduce, they have a fertile horse. If donkeys reproduce, they get fertile donkeys. But if a horse and a donkey crossbreed, they produce a mule. And because a mule is completely infertile, it just cannot reproduce further, that definitively proves that horses and donkeys do not belong to the same species. Make sense? So, how do we actually figure out an organism's name out in the wild? Well, we use something called a dichotomous key. Di means two, and trotomous means branching. It's this incredibly important scientific tool that uses a series of 2-choice statements based purely on observable physical traits. By making choices step by step, it branches down and down until you accurately identify the organism. It's kind of like a biological choose-your-own-adventure. Let me act as your mentor for a second and show you the exact hack to using this. Whenever you're faced with a dichotomous key, always start at statement number 1. Read the 2 choices, like does it have a green body or a purple body? Depending on what you literally observe on the specimen, you simply follow the go-to direction to the next numbered statement. You just repeat this loop until the key stops telling you to go to a number and instead gives you the unique biological name of the organism. It's a completely foolproof process of elimination that will never fail you on a biology practical. Part 3. The 5 biological kingdoms, the macro level. Okay, let's step back and look at the absolute macro level of life. Every single living organism fits into one of these 5 biological kingdoms. Let's break down their defining features. First up, check out cell nature. Prokaryotes are the only ones without a true nucleus. Their DNA is just naked and circular. Protictis, fungi, plants, and animals are all eukaryotic, meaning they actually have a true nucleus with linear DNA. Now, when it comes to nutrition, plants are strictly autotrophic. They make their own food. Fungi and animals are heterotrophic, meaning they have to consume other things. And interestingly enough, prokaryotes and protictis can actually be either. Part 4. Classifying the animal kingdom. Vertebrates and arthropods.
Zooming in closer on the creatures with backbones, let's look at the 5 classes of vertebrates. I really want to teach you something I call the heart chamber hack. If you look at their anatomy in evolutionary order, there's a literal mathematical pattern hiding right in plain sight. Fish have a 2-chambered heart. Amphibians and reptiles both step up to a 3-chambered heart. And finally, birds and mammals step up to a 4-chambered heart. It's just a simple 2-3-3-4-4 pattern. You also see this evolution in reproduction, moving from jelly-covered eggs laid in water for fish and amphibians to rubbery or hard-shelled eggs on land, all the way up to mammals producing live young.
Let's visually compare some of these aquatic adaptations. Fish use fins for movement and balance, and they rely entirely on gills to breathe underwater. But amphibians, like frogs, represent this really crucial transitional step. As adults, they develop lungs and actually use their moist, scaleless skin for breathing. They also develop 4 limbs, often with webbed back feet that are just perfectly adapted for swimming. And let's see how this builds further in reptiles and birds. Reptiles possess dry skin covered in scales, they're cold-blooded, and they lay rubbery eggs through internal fertilization. Birds, on the other hand, made a massive evolutionary leap. They're warm-blooded, covered in feathers with scales only remaining on their legs, and they lay hard-shelled eggs. Right, now for the creatures with hard external skeletons, the arthropods. This massive group includes crustaceans, insects, arachnids, and myriapods. Now, the ultimate trick for classifying these guys is the leg counting hack. Seriously, just count the legs. Insects have exactly 3 pairs. Arachnids have exactly 4 pairs. Crustaceans have 5 or more pairs, and myriapods have 10 or more pairs. If you just memorize those numbers, 3, 4, 5, 10, you'll instantly know which class of arthropods you're looking at. And this brilliantly illustrates that leg counting hack in action. Think of an arachnid like a scorpion. Notice the 4 pairs of legs and how its body is distinctly divided into 2 parts, a cephalothorax and an abdomen. Compare that to a myriapod, specifically a centipede. It has 10 or more pairs of legs on a body that really isn't clearly divided into distinct regions. Instead, it's made up of many segments, usually with 1 pair of legs per segment. Before we leave the animals entirely, let's briefly highlight the crustaceans, things like crabs and woodlice. These are largely aquatic arthropods, which means they actually possess gills for respiration. They boast 5 or more pairs of legs, 2 pairs of antennae, and a really unique, hard exoskeleton, made not just of chitin, but heavily reinforced with salts. Part 5. Plants, ferns, and flowers. Pivoting away from the animals over to the plants, there is a fundamental structural difference based completely on how they reproduce. Ferns, for example, do not produce flowers or seeds. Instead, they have these leaves called fronds, and they reproduce by generating spores right on the underside of those fronds. Flowering plants, however, are far more advanced. They reproduce sexually by means of seeds which are kept safely enclosed inside the flowers they produce. Flowering plants are then further divided into 2 massive categories: monocots and dicots. And here's the cool trick. You can often tell them apart just by looking at the visual structure of their petals. Monocot flowers generally have flower parts in 3s, or multiples of 3. Dicot flowers usually have their parts in 4s or 5s. So next time you're in a garden, just count the petals. But the absolute core, defining anatomical difference actually lies hiding in their seeds. Monocots, which are chiefly your herbaceous flowers, have an embryo with only a single cotyledon or seed leaf. Dicots, as that di prefix gives away, have an embryo with 2 cotyledons. Part 6. Viruses, the ultimate exception. Biologists love their rules, but nature always provides an exception. Viruses literally do not fit into any of the 5 kingdoms we just went over. Why? Well, because viruses are not technically considered living organisms at all. Their structure is incredibly simple. It's just a piece of genetic material, either DNA or RNA, wrapped up inside a protein coat called a capsid. No nucleus, no cytoplasm, no organelles, nothing. In fact, they exhibit absolutely 0 living activity when they're outside a host cell. Because they don't even have the ribosomes to make their own proteins, they're what we call obligate intracellular parasites. They can only replicate by hacking into a living cell and taking it over. So it leaves us with a pretty provocative thought to end our masterclass. If viruses aren't technically alive, how do these tiny little genetic blueprints hold the extraordinary power to completely dictate the behavior of living cells? Keep thinking like biologists, focused learners. Until next time.